Good morning. Welcome to our webinar. This time we will look into solutions and how to increase productivity on top of Azure tools. Today, my colleague Martin Jurians couldn't join us due to the very joyful personal reason. So I, Dace Rostaka, a business development manager at Primend Latvia, will walk you through the introduction part. But before we start talk about Azure tools, short on introduction on Primend. So, we are proud to be best known for our unrivaled competence in Microsoft technologies. In Estonia, we have been recognized as a Microsoft Partner of the Year 5 times. Such an achievement that has never been done by any other company in the Baltics. Team at Primend Latvia is also proud of its first achievements and will surely follow Estonian lead. So via our shared knowledge, our focus is to support companies in their digital transformation. Primend got started 6 years ago in Estonia with the aim to create solutions for people who want their companies to be successful. To provide this, we are constantly learning and striving to become better. We always aim to provide solutions and services using the latest technologies, helping our clients to become more efficient and profitable. Our vision is to be the international company and cover all 3 Baltic states, and this is soon to become true. Primend Latvia was established 1.5 years ago, and today we have a team of 7 people here. And Vilnius office is opening early next year. And now I would like to introduce our guest, an Azure professional, Aigars Maciņš, Head of Engineering Excellence at Emergent, company that is widely known for its previous name, Exigent Services, and team of more than 600 IT professionals. Aigars' focus is to raise the competence and knowledge of cloud solutions by consulting and helping companies through their digital transformation. He has been working with Azure since early years of the platform. Being a Microsoft evangelist and later in the project management at Microsoft, many successful localization projects have been implemented and hackathons organized. We would like to kindly ask your questions during the webinar that will be answered in the closing stage of it and or after. All answers will be available on our webpage. So Aigars, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Hey, today we will briefly talk about how you can, as let's say, software creators, can you use Azure to enhance your productivity? So most of the talk will be focused actually on using bits and pieces around Azure DevOps. This is meant as introduction level of talk, and as an example of application, I will be using a Mendix, which is a low-code platform for creating applications. I will briefly talk about architecture of that, but it's actually a very good example how you can leverage as a cloud solution in reality, in practice. So. And then most of the talk will be kind of done in presenting around stuff that you can do in different tools. So there will be a few slides, but after that we will switch into kind of tooling mode and see kind of what are things that we can do there and what we can achieve there. So let's start. So Mendix as a platform, so it's a low-code development platform. It's a leader by Gartner in low-code platform for quite many years. And it is a startup which was originally founded in Netherlands, I believe. And then over the time, they also have now HQ in Boston, but in reality, they're also owned by Siemens. So they have very good industry connections, and they are quite widely used actually to enable low-code capabilities. What makes it interesting for kind of cloud stories is that at the runtime level, it is stateless solution, which is works very nice with the horizontal scaling. And also you can quite easily pack into a container. So that's also kind of very nice things that we can, what some demos will be based around today. Just before we go into deeper about this stuff, I want to explain a bit what's the difference between, let's say, low code and, let's say, normal, usual development that we used to have. where we write everything in code. So these slides are a bit borrowed from SAP. You can see trade copyright here. So then idea here is that when you are just, let's say, when you have some core platform or solution, at some points, and these teams are kind of working on enhancing your core capabilities in the business, as in they also have a limited throughput of what they can do because just they're limited resource. So they are building some of this kind of enhancement in your core systems, and your core systems might have their own goals and the purposes where they're being built. But then from business perspective, when you're doing operations, sometimes you need more or something different because different business departments also have different needs. And that's where low-code development comes in. And the idea is that you can create some simple applications or automations or some simple workflows by integrating different APIs and maybe creating a user interfaces for that. And that's where potentially, as this would also down the road enable also citizen developer movement, where people can develop these solutions on their own within certain guardrails which are put by IT people and governance people in place, and kind of enables their work to be done. And as we can see here, then for these kind of scenarios, kind of this tool is kind of used to enable more like self-service IT development for some of the scenarios which they might work. But as we know, it's not always true in the sense that it's fully self-service. A lot of APIs and integrations need to be exposed by both parties. So they still need core development inputs, but they maybe have to input a bit less of their time to enable these capabilities to work versus fully developing solutions. Another thing that you have to take into account is complexity of solutions. If they are fairly complex, it could be that over time, like total cost of ownership for low-code solutions kind of becomes higher than for, let's say, core developer created solutions. So all of these aspects need to be taken into account. So in order to judge what is the best particular thing to do at any particular case. Okay, so then a bit about Mendix architecture. So the cool piece here is that you can, so it's a kind of bit traditional layered architecture. So what you get is you get a client, which is a website, or there's also some native application support that it can create, but we will be focusing a bit more on the website part. And then there is a runtime, which is stateless, like I mentioned before, where you can put your, let's say, logic in kind of diagram flows. You can put also your data entity information there and build your domain models. And naturally, you can connect to database, different web services or APIs and whatnot, and interact with all of these things. And as I mentioned, you can put it to run inside of Docker container, which is great for cloud stuff. So, and now comes the question, what kind of services we could be using on Azure to kind of enable us for working and testing out solutions there and be more productive around these things. So naturally, I guess, so as I mentioned, that these applications could run in Docker. So we have to evaluate, so there's a bunch of container services in Azure. So like first thought maybe it could be like, okay, so it's a simple application, let's put it in the container service. But then when you start to think about container service on Azure, then it's more meant to be working for like burst workloads where you have some kind of, I don't know, like a need to run some kind of function or code for short amount of time, and it's a non-permanent solution. So you just need to do some kind of calculations or processing. So then Azure Container Service is more meant for these kind of scenarios. Naturally, we can also set up for a couple of, I don't know, Linux VMs and work within and set up with Docker stuff on these virtual machines, but that kind of is a hassle because we have to do a lot of infrastructure management. So that's also not that great. What else? And then we can think about like Kubernetes service, which maybe is not here on this picture, but then you start to think like Kubernetes is a bit complex. You have to manage a lot of things, and maybe there is not immediate benefit unless you know that your solution will need a lot of dynamic scaling based on user demand and so on. But if you have fairly static needs, so and typically you will have with these low-code solutions, because usually these solutions are used by certain business departments. These business departments has fixed number of employees who are working there and doing in back office kind of scenario. So that could be like, I don't know, 40, 30 people using that. So your demands and for resources also actually very stable and very well known. And that leads us to actually using on Azure service, you can host web apps. So even if you want to publish them in the internal network, you can do that also with web applications, which is a kind of very interesting thing. So inside of Azure App Service, you can create web apps with the Linux containers, and that's actually what we will be going for today. And as a kind of example, that there is this capability. Another thing what we need to think about when we are setting up environments is that naturally we probably want to have segregation of different resources between what we are doing. And on Azure, another quite cool thing is that when we are using some of these services, depending on the service, we can also get a discounts on pricing if we are having test dev subscription. So if we are using test dev services, then we can kind of decrease the amount of our running costs of running stuff in cloud hosting. So that's also something that we definitely need to leverage, especially for development or testing environments. I would recommend everybody to use that because it could save on some, depending on the resources, costs could be saved, let's say, by 50% of full price. So that's something to keep in mind. What else? Oh yeah, so then in order for all of that stuff to make it work, naturally, there's other elements that we can use in cloud to kind of make us more productive. So where we can leverage also key vault technology for storing our secrets. Also, what's very interesting is that cloud already forces us to think about some good security practices and other things. And we can also create a bunch of, let's say, abstraction layers to enable integrations and so on. But I guess because of limited time, I will not go over all of these capabilities, but that's one bit of information. Okay. Oh yeah, and in terms of storage, so these Mendix applications also need something. So it needs a database, and it also might need some storage where we can store some persistent data. There is an option actually to put for these web apps also to assign some kind of persistent storage layers from files, or you can use also some kind of, but Mendix also supports blob storage as well. So it depends on what kind of parameters we are feeding into that for it to make work. And another thing that we get for free with web apps is also that we get multiple deployment slots for whatever we are creating. So we can create also, like, say, staged rollouts in more easier, and kind of also have a bit of, let's say, load balancing or protection against DDoS services and other kind of nice pieces of services. And as I mentioned, most important thing, you don't have to make it public internet site. You can also, if you have connected Azure or your customer has connected Azure to their environments, you can also create this as intranet site, which is accessible only for their internal users, and it's not exposed over public internet. So it's still in public cloud, but not over public internet. So that's also a quite great capability to think about. And you can create also backups for data which needs to be backed up. Okay, anyways, let's go further in architecture. So based on what I said, so yeah, so when we are creating this container, so what we need to do is we need to publish this container into Azure Container Registry. Then from there, probably need to deploy it somewhere and also connect it to some kind of database and see what options are there. Another thing, so let's try to run a small demonstration on bits and pieces of what kind of resources we need to prepare and in what order actually, because it matters. So if I go in the beginning to Azure portal, so let me go and create some sample resources so that we can cover and see what is happening there. So first thing what we probably might need to think about here is the way how I like to organize things is that I would like to start with resource groups because that allows, well, also to delete stuff more easier after I've created my demos, but also it's very good unit of organization. So let me create a new demo here. So this would be, let's say, productivity. Then we need to select a region in Azure. So one thing to keep in mind about regions is that in most of the public cloud providers, you are not paying for incoming traffic, but you're paying for outgoing traffic. So if you're creating some kind of resources, even within one subscription or something like that, you might incur charges if you're doing also data replications across regions and across regions, or if you're moving data, just randomly setting up your services in different sites. So if we are in Europe, so we can figure out what kind of location we would like to pick. So there is quite nice selection, but traditionally we can pick up North Europe, which is, if I remember correctly, Ireland, and West Europe, which is Netherlands. So, kind of a thing, but not. So let's pick that one. So let's create this resource group. And when the resource group is created, so they are usually done quite instantaneously. Well, another thing that we need to create here is, like I mentioned, probably we need to create some kind of database. So, and Mendix as a platform supports actually quite a lot of databases, but Mendix its own, let's say, SaaS services are running on Postgres. So generally, we probably will try to use Postgres database. And the Postgres database, we can get Postgres database in many flavors. So let me just go back. I think I pressed something, but what I would like to show to you is that you can also select a Postgres database on Azure as a managed service as well. So you can get Postgres database inside of containers, so you can put them kind of together. Or close, but you can also create Azure database for Postgres servers. Let's create a new one. And we can select what kind of options we want to have here. So in my case, because it's for demo and simple application, so probably I will use the single server setup, where I will put a Postgres database with some kind of, it has support for also replications, some full text search, and etc. Or you can also use another options how you want to deploy it, and which could be even more complicated ones. So one of the most exciting ones is Azure Arc, enable the PostgreSQL hyperscale, which means that because it's Azure Arc enabled, it means that you can also mix and match that with your on-premises deployment if you have Azure Arc setups done. So that it means that you can mix and match what you have with your cloud and in your on-premises or customers' data centers, which is quite nice. And you can manage it all from Azure portal as well, and the APIs and command line as well. So that's quite useful. Okay, so let's create this database. Yeah, select resource group. So the one I created probably was something. Activity, yes, something. select unit name. So I think that should be. And here is kind of one of the danger places. So one is location. So we need to select where we want to be. So it's selecting US location, but we need to be in West Europe. So that's Europe West. So here I got it. Another thing you can already select for your data, whatever you are creating in clean server or you are restoring from some kind of backup, and then when you are selecting it from some kind of backup, you need to select where this backup is. So in this case, it will be clean. Which kind of Postgres version you want to run. So it supports 11th, 10th, and 9, 6, and 5. And then we need to select what kind of resources and how much we want to pay for it. So these are general purpose ones. So this would be probably what you would use in production scenarios, or memory optimized if you need more memory and you want to do kind of more selects which require more memory and so on. Or you can use basic for development environments or fooling around and whatnot. So in this case, I will select basic because it will be a bit cheaper. And depending on your selections, you can also see how is your monthly cost estimate changing. So in this case, so development with 1 core will cost me something like 30 euros, but per month. And then I guess how many cores I can spin? 2 cores would be 55 euros. In general case, the price jumps quite a lot in that regards, but it also kind of has a bit more options and configuration stuff that you can arrange, and performance also will be better. So in terms of storage, yeah, will be your database. In my case, actually will be super small, and I need 1 core. But storage is fairly cheap at large in cloud, so it will not really save a lot. And another thing is that this storage will be basic, so it will be a bit slower than probably in general one. And how longer backups kept? So 7 days is the default one, so that's quite good thing to know. And you can also enable the storage is growing automatically, so you don't have to think about it, which could be also a useful option. So what else? Oh yeah, then you need to enter some parameters. So in this case, I will just put username and password. And yeah, and another interesting setting is that for Postgres database, you can select infrastructure double encryption setting, which I guess is not available in that region and not maybe on that subscription layer, but which allows you essentially to have more encryption with more keys. So it will make your database slower, but it will ensure that your data is encoded more. And what's important for enterprise scenarios a lot is that in most of enterprises, well, not most, in some actually, if you want to be owned in fuller control of your data. So one is that Microsoft, based on your tickets or your escalations to it, might access some of your resources if you're granting them rights, and that information is fully auditable. But if you want to be in fuller control of that, you can also bring your own key and have your own high security device on your on-premises environment where you can generate keys, and then Azure can create services with this bring your own key service. What it means is that if you disconnect this your on-premises devices, let's say from Azure, then nobody can, none of the resources will actually be usable because all of the keys are stored locally on your end. But of course, it has a cost of performance. So when you are creating, for example, virtual machine, if normal virtual machine usually took like a couple of minutes or seconds to be set up, with Microsoft managed keys, but with your own keys that could take like half an hour or more, depending on the size and how much stuff you want to have there, because you are kind of encrypting it on the fly. So that's something to kind of take into account. Anyways, so let's review and create. So now we created our database, and let's go a bit back. So another thing what we need to do, what we need to create here is our container registry, because we were speaking about Docker containers. So what we need to do, we need to create Azure Container Registry. So, and as we know, then Docker Hub has put a bit of throttling limits, so it's not fully free anymore if you are using it heavily. So probably maybe Azure Container Registry is one of the alternative options that you can give a think. So consideration, container. So, okay. Oh my God. So, and then we can just create it. It's actually fairly cheap because essentially we are just paying for storage. So let me just change one thing. Oh my God, I have muted myself. How long ago? So when did I mute myself?
Couple of minutes, I think.
Oh my God. So yeah, I got confused with drilling. Anyways, so I hope it stopped. So anyways, so then what I want to say is that when we are doing development or product development, so then usually we want to have a kind of place where we are gathering requirements. Then we are doing code or static analysis on this code as well, and running, also writing unit tests and ensuring that we have proper coverage, and preferably all of that is integrated into one environment where we can also kind of provide immediate feedback loop to developers or people who are kind of working on that. And normally we include, in terms of requirement management systems, also kind of practices of having certain unit test coverage or integration test coverage also as a definition of done. So whatever we have delivered. And so when this code is done, created, then we are run and kind of compliant with the rules. And then what we are also, style guides are kind of enforced through some kind of linters. And then when it's done, then we want to publish and create artifacts. So in this case, we want to compile something and publish to some kind of artifact feeds. So in .NET case, it could be some NuGet feeds. In Java case, it could be Maven. In JavaScript, it would be NPM. Or in our case, in this particular example, it would be some kind of container registry. And then we also want to see if that software is working, so to agile values. So then for it to be, we need to deploy it somewhere. So normally we would also put the next step where we are deploying the same software on some kind of development environment. And then later on, there could be some kind of ring fencing mechanics or whatever release process where you're pushing these artifacts from these artifact stores to other locations. like it could be your production environments for your PaaS services. It could be also some kind of place which you can push for your customers to take the code and the things that you have built, and where they can automatically pick it up in perfect form. And then you also can collect feedback, monitor performance of solutions that you have done, preferably anonymized, but just so you can see whether your solutions are working, and all of that at the end of the day feeds back into our requirements. But in reality, on each of these steps, we have like internal feedback loops, and it's kind of main things that we care is that we are validating our assumptions and invalidating them all of the time constantly. So in Azure case, the tools which I would suggest for everybody to kind of look at if you are having development in Microsoft Azure would be Azure DevOps. So for work and requirement management, we can use Azure DevOps work items, and you can it's actually quite nice thing to do. Then for code, so Microsoft bought GitHub recently, and because of that, there's way more integrations with GitHub as well, and also supports this Microsoft identity, which you can use to log in here. So our Azure DevOps repos. I hope that most of the teams are these days using Git as a version control system, and you can also tie these Git ID work items and so on together so that you can manage pieces. But you can also do a lot of these management tasks and approvals using GitHub as well. And then in Azure DevOps, you can create pipelines, which recently kind of moved to YAML format. So that one also you can do. And for kind of compiling your application and then publishing it. And you can also use Azure DevOps pipelines for deploying your application. One kind of word of what I have observed in most of the cases is that for deploying actually your applications, you usually create separate pipeline, which are still kind of beneath like a build tab, where you are creating just common pipelines, because let's say for environment management and so on, Azure DevOps has some opinions about what it defines as environment and what you can use it, and it's not always fitting the bill. So let's kind of be just recognize where we can do what, and do what makes us more productive. So in that regard, let's pick what works for us. Another thing which is very useful is Azure Monitor, which is umbrella term or umbrella service, you could say, for different log collection and gathering services that Azure has. And you can here gather data both from, let's say, infrastructure layer from Azure within its services, and also from your applications through App Insights or any other log gathering mechanics. And it's actually very useful. So you can access your application logs and store, or forwards and analyze them with some querying capabilities, or you can then send them also to maybe some security event systems if that's relevant. In Microsoft case, that would be like Azure Sentinel. So one tricky piece here with Azure Monitor is that whenever you are analyzing these logs, is that you kind of know that logs are growing very fast. So for any interactions that people are doing inside of your applications, they could generate logs in amounts which is like 10 or 100-fold. So that storage is kind of growing. Needs for log keeping kind of grows rapidly. So you have to recognize that you probably have to delete also some logs or put them into archive tier or of Azure Blob Storage. So that's things that we kind of have to manage in our lifecycle. So that's one tricky part. Okay, let's move back a bit to code pieces. So what I have done here is, so I just created a sample subscription. So there is a boards. I will not really spend so much time kind of going into what kind of how you should manage items here and so on. But generally, what's important is that you can link your commits and features with through this ID. And also, I will not really touch repos part because, I will go into more pipelines pieces. So you can see here is a generic list of all pipelines. And here you can also create environments and releases. But as I said, most of the teams sometimes just use just pipelines and don't care about these ones. Also for the release purposes. So don't feel constrained and do what makes sense for you. Probably the important bit here would be to have some kind of strong naming convention where you can link what you are doing with that thing and what it means. So probably put in names, phrases like that this is a build step or this is deployment step to whatever environment or release step and so on. So let's go to this pipeline. So what I have done is that I have logged in and linked this pipeline with my GitHub repo, which I have created. So let me just open that repo. And that is kind of quite simple repo. It really doesn't have much stuff. So what it has this Mendix application code, which was put there. Also, it has this code of Azure Pipeline, and this is essentially the code that you are seeing in that editor, but it's also stored in this repo. So, and because the way how it's set up, it means that whenever I change something here, it will also trigger a build process to be kicked on. What else is interesting in this repo is that, yeah, well, that's fine. So one of the things is that because I'm using a browser in private mode, then when there is, like, say, like you want to integrate different services and so on, I sometimes run into challenge that my all pop-ups are being blocked. Well, I also have a browser which is very aggressive about that. So in that regards, you need to be aware of that and kind of wonder why something is not happening. So why I cannot link some services and so on. So let's try to create a new pipeline just to kind of see what I mean by that. So let's create a new pipeline. So so we need to say what will be the place where we will store code. So we could say that it will be GitHub in our case, or it could be Bitbucket or GitHub Enterprise, which is your private deployment of GitHub. We can select what kind of repository we want to use. So I can take any repository I have. So for example, I will take, I don't know, let's take something, this one. So then I need to enter my password, which I hopefully will remember. Nope. Nope. Okay, cool. And when I'm doing that, then GitHub is asking me that I want to, whatever I want to give permissions to Azure Pipelines to access this repo. So I select some repos. So in this case, so I already had before this repo which I created for this demo, but I will also select this one just so that we can see. And we can also kind of pause this process and kind of suspend Azure Pipeline access to a repo if we feel like we need to do that. Now we also need to log in into Azure or Azure DevOps account. So in this case, it will be this one. And now it's trying to link these different accounts and the things together. Let's do it again another time. Hopefully it will. Okay, cool. And then we can select whatever we have here. So in this case, I will just let's add some kind of random pipeline and see how it works. So when these pipelines are defined within a YAML format, which we know is not a format and not a markup, so it's kind of specific vendor descriptive language, how we are describing our pieces. And the cool piece here is that we can just write our scripts, and another cool piece is that naturally it works. And so we can write whatever which would work on most of the Linux pieces. And for example, because these machines, VMs, also have like Docker installed, so we can also run some Docker commands. So we can say like, I don't know, Docker list, something like. So we can run any Docker command that we want to see and see what happens. And what this will do also, it will add also this Azure Pipelines YAML file to that repo, so that there is this intermediate link between all of the things. And then let's see how it works. But that was kind of just for purpose of demonstration. Another thing that you need to do is, if you want to link to some Azure resources, is that if you click on settings, which is on lower left corner here, you need to select also go to pipelines and settings part here. No, not settings part, but service connections part. And you can connect to your different services here. And this is another place where you have to be aware of pop-ups. So if your pop-ups are being blocked, then you will not have access there. Or it will just show a spinning wheel for a long time. So in this case, for example, we want to register to some Docker registry. So we can connect to Docker Hub or some other, if we are using, for example, Artifactory or something like that, and that's exposed to internet or through then you can also use that one, or you can use Azure Container Registry. And when you're using Azure Container Registries, then it will load your information based on your subscription, which is linked to your account. So in my case, after a while, we should start seeing my subscription data. I already have created these service connections before, so for some previously prepared data, but I just wanted to show that this kind of piece could take a while. And another one is that you need to be aware of blocked pop-ups, like in this case. So that's when it's so that you can kind of avoid seeing the spinning wheel for most of the time. Anyways, so when you allow it, depending on your browser behavior, probably you also have to refresh the page. Anyways, so let me go to existing service connections. So what I have here is I have linked my Docker registry to my account, so I can click edit, and then I can see all of the data which are entered here. So it's automatically pre-selected Mendix CR registry, which I had created before, and this is the name. This is the name that I can use to invoke the service connection as a parameter in some of the pipelines where I have access is granted. So in this case, it's security is grant access to all pipelines, but you can also be a bit more granular about that, and you can also see who and when access is secret. So it means also you can save your kind of secrets or connection information in more store kind of safe way, and you also have auditable history of whoever did what there, which might be important. Anyways, so let's go into pipelines and let's, oh yeah, so this piece probably broke down because I wrote Docker command wrongly. Let me see. Yep. So this is not a Docker command. Yes, which is great. So anyways, so I will not fix it, but let's go into the one which I created before, and there's also a couple of tricks that I wanted to show here. So it's authorizing with GitHub, downloading this YAML file from there. So what is here is, which is very interesting and nice feature. As I mentioned, you can use any Linux command. So we are using here wget. So in the case of Mendix, Mendix has its own kind of special way of kind of compiling and creating these Docker packs. So for that, you need to download like Mendix Docker build pack, which kind of puts everything into Docker, and has a lot of kind of configurations there and the defaults for and whatnot to be done. So so for that one to work, you just download it from address. You can also maybe, yeah, so this public address. Then what you can also need to also be aware of that is that if you have to work with some tar.gz like archives, then the safest way to make it work is that you execute both gunzip and tar commands. Otherwise, it's not really that maybe working that well. So that's just environmental specification, the things that you have to be aware of. So and then what it does, it kind of extracts this archive here. Another thing that you can do, as explained previously, you could use Docker build and write all of your parameters here and make things work. Things kind of work for you. But in my case, you can also add some kind of parameters coming from shorthands which Microsoft has created. So I want to set shorthands. So if you type here on the side is like Docker. So I'm using this one. Then we can select what kind of container registry you want to interact, maybe repository. So in my case, probably repository sample. And then what kind of commands you want to use. There is combined build and push command, but that's not really useful in some regards, because in case of Mendix, I need to also feed a lot of arguments for things to work, and I also need to have a Docker file. So because I'm adding all of these arguments, it means that in build and push you cannot add arguments. It will ignore them. So you just I split it into two. You can also log into Azure Container Registry or any other place, and so on. So, and just to show how it looks like when you are selecting and putting all the parameters, essentially this generates this small code snippet which you can use here. So added task. Well, yeah. So that's kind of cool. And because it's created by Microsoft, there is also like some interesting things how it links these tasks together. So, and it makes life a bit easier and simpler to manage. So what it does here is, yeah, so this line essentially what it creates and runs this container for Mendix. Then the next line here logins to this container registry, which I have defined in services. So it just, I use it as a separate login activity, just to be sure. What you can do also is you can also log out from your container registry. I don't think anybody does it in most of the scenarios, but if you want to be kind of on the safe side of things for your jobs, you probably could add also something like this. So let's add it. Then next phase is you need to push whatever was created in this build step, so to cloud. So let's do it. So let's click save, and because I said so, it automatically kind of is triggered by any changes in master branch. They committed to master, which is a bad practice. We normally should use some kind of pull request mechanics. So then what it does, it just triggers this build process and it will run. So I'm using just Microsoft shared pool of resources. And the job results, just from based on something which was run earlier, is that we kind of can see what happened here. And so here we can see that a fairly complex process was run. And after that, so this push job essentially pushed bits and pieces to Azure Container Registry. So and if we would go into side of that container registry, we would see that we have pushed a new build there. And now we should have another one. So, well, it is still compiling. Anyways, so while that is running, so one thing that we could do, in theory, we could also create a deploy pipeline. So we can create a new pipeline, which would be related to the same code and where we could deploy pieces. So to our Azure environment. So just to be being aware of time. So let's see, select the same repository. And what we want to do is, okay, let's start with whatever, something, doesn't really matter. Everything, and what we need to do here is, so if we are clicking show assistance, and we can select what we need to do. So what we want to do, and trigger would be main, or we can remove trigger, actually. Maybe there is trigger by anything automatically. So Okay. So, and what we will do is that we will trigger it manually by something. So then we can say that we want to do is Azure App Service deployment, or there's also App Service like managing part or whatnot. So, and then now we select our subscription and resources that we might want to publish. So in this case, I have the service subscription. Then we need to select service type. So you can see there is a lot of different service types. So we can have web apps on Windows or Linux. We can publish web apps as containers. So this is when we will go. You can also publish function apps here. And if you have created your own containers based on KEDA framework, maybe for for hybrid cloud deployment scenarios, then you can use that as well. Then you can also create API apps or mobile app backends, essentially. So then we select whatever service. So I have actually pre-created a web app service. And we can also set that we want to deploy to some kind of specific slot. So in this case, there is only production slot, but if we would create from Azure Portal or Azure Command Line more slots, we could also have that one. And then we need to specify which kind of registry or namespace we want to use. So in this case, if I remember correctly, then registry name was sample and image. I don't remember what name I put. Okay, let me put also sample, but probably that's so tags. I remember that like build which pushed an image was like to number 33, so that one should work. And then here we can specify startup command. So I will not specify, but in case of Mendix, you actually have to specify a lot of startup parameters, like connection strings to database, what kind of configurations do you want to use with for storage. So whatever you are using something inside of container, or if you have mounted some persistent storage, you also need to specify all of that stuff and so on. So that's kind of important. So essentially this generates this task. I will save it. I will not really run it because I know that it will kind of fail, but I just wanted to kind of show it as an example. And also to say that you can have multiple pipeline scripts inside of same repo, so that you can manage bits and pieces together. And maybe that's actually, I would say it's actually, I would even recommend to have it like that, because maybe in some different, not root location, but also maybe root is not that bad. If you don't have them too many, so that you can have easy way to see where everything is, and also if you have a bit more complex environments, it makes searching easier. So let me see. Yeah. So then, oh yeah, another bit and piece about Azure, so which I definitely need to remind, is that if you are creating some kind of database in Azure, by default you cannot really connect to it in any way. So what is important is that you are selecting here. One is that you allow other Azure resources to connect to this database if you have such need. So in this case, you need to select yes. And another thing is, if you want to connect to the database, let's say from your local computer or something like that, you need to specify your kind of IP address. So this is my IP address that I have. So I have put it here as allowed IP address. So that's these settings you can see on connection security, which is something that you would need. Another thing that you get already out of hand is that you also get connection strings for plenty of different applications. But yeah, so that you could use. So let's look at web app. So it's your, like, you need specified database name. You get Postgres database server address, admin username, and the password that I put for this admin username. So this is kind of all of the essential data that you need to connect to database. So what else? So yeah, just another thing which I wanted to say, kind of to bootstrap your kind of productivity when you are using Azure, and also maybe speaking with your enterprise customers. So Microsoft has created, originally it was called on Microsoft Architecture Center. So Azure Architecture Framework. So there was it used to be called like Azure Cloud Adoption Framework. and now they are kind of renaming it and rebranding it to AWS name. So Microsoft Azure Well-Architected Framework, which is what the AWS did. And essentially it provides a lot of checklists and guidance how you should approach building your solution on top of Azure. And one of the things which is very interesting here is that it also offers opinionated deployment blueprints, which you can use and review according to the process which is written here, which means that let's say you can evolve your architecture defaults essentially, which enable your kind of deployment to be secure or meet some kind of requirement that your company, customers or company is having because of some, I don't know, regulatory things or whatnot. So all of that stuff is enforced in this framework. So for example, if you have some kind of reliability or security requirements which could be conflicting, this framework provides you a guidance how to tackle these kind of challenges and what are the trade-offs and options you need to be aware of when considering these things. Also, it offers fairly good, so there is a concept of landing zones, which essentially is like these default settings that you need to be set up in your subscriptions. And there is even like sample landing zone code on GitHub, which you can use and adapt to your needs. So which covers most of these kind of important design patterns and things you have to think when you're deploying in cloud. And that's quite big booster for productivity for most of the companies who are just starting their cloud journeys as well. So you can use it, I mean, in your customer engagements, but to give it a kind of fair treatment, that this kind of just speaking about landing zones takes like a couple of hours. So I will just say that there is such resource, and I definitely recommend you to invest time into checking it out. Another thing that it has is, if I go back, there is on Microsoft Learn portal, there is also courses which you can pass, or materials online where you can learn about all of the aspects and how to use this and what are the things that you need to check out to kind of be masters of Azure Well-Architected Framework. And another thing is that if you're pursuing some kind of like Microsoft Managed Service Provider certification or partnership level, then your company might be audited against how well you are implementing this Azure Well-Architected Framework, and you understand the trade-offs and how you operate these things. So it's essentially, this is kind of the go-to materials that you have to learn when you're pursuing this kind of path. For kind of greater collaboration with a vendor of this particular cloud. So what else? And the answer is also like very useful checklists that you can use to assess your state or your customer state and so on. So that's, and they can give you also some kind of recommendations and or just questions will trigger you to think about what kind of solutions you can use and what kind of things you need to be aware of in order for it to be kind of useful for you. So going back to slides. Yeah, so essentially that was everything that I wanted to tell now. So maybe there's some questions. I do not hear. Gotcha. You're muted.
I guess, do you hear me now?
Yes.
So at this moment, I do not see any active question.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, I see there was a notification that I was on mute. Sorry for that, and sorry for some drilling happening around. It was a bit distracting to me as well. So yeah, so if you have questions and kind of also want to access a bit kind of demo code or something like that, so you can probably reach out to organizers and they will share some information to you if you're interested. So thank you.
Please do send your questions if they pop up on your mind to the following email. And thank you for participation. See you next time. Bye-bye.